Thanks so much, Jürgen, for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here and share this occasion with you, as well as all of your colleagues. I apologize for not being around yesterday. As you've heard, there was a false alarm. I had due reason to suspect that I might have contracted this viral disease, and it turned out I had not. 2 tests later, I'm clean, and I'm very happy to be here. As best as I know. Well, we're here with Jürgen, in good part to honor Jürgen. That led me to briefly reminisce and try to recall when I first got aware of the existence of this gentleman. I started in MR in 1994, and it must have been 2 or 3 days into my master's project in Zurich that I read his name the first time. It must have been the rare paper at the time. Only a little later, I gobbled up the phase graph theory because I needed it for some simulations. Another reminiscence that I don't know, Jürgen, whether you can relate it. At the time in Zurich, there was talk of a local MR system of which the users said, each time Hennig is here, we get signal. I don't know which one that would have been, but so you were the signal maker, not the rain maker, or the signal maker. And then another thing I want to mention is the Monterey workshop, 1997. That was my first workshop of that kind. Super opportunity and occasion. You gave a talk about burst. And I sat through it and was blown away. It was, okay, those of you who are at this age know that burst is not all that simple to understand. Jürgen set out to explain it, I think in 15 minutes, in 4 different ways. 4 different analogies and theoretical settings. That was really cool. And I was blown away and thought, seriously, I'm not pandering. I want to be like this guy. This is my field. So another occasion when I wanted to be like this guy was, I think it must have been the Philadelphia ISMRM, the closing party. So, as you know, Jürgen is a giant not only in the field, but also in terms of just body height, if that is the right notion. So, at parties, you would immediately see whether he's there dancing or not. And you could clearly see him, and that was one cool gig. And I thought, I want to be like this guy. So, enough said about reminiscences. For all my affection, Jürgen gave me a really tough title. MRI beyond sense. What am I supposed to talk about? One thing that I do sometimes when I really can't do the semantics of something, I put it through circular Google translation into different languages to see what comes out after a few cycles. After 2 cycles, this turned into MRI beyond reason, and from that moment on, I felt free to talk about whatever I like. And I thought, sense is a good cue, of course, or parallel imaging is a good cue. And, well, in the spirit of yesterday, today, tomorrow, I thought I'll try and think along a few thoughts that kind of start in those days, have led through the past years, and of which I think that they also lead into the future. And the guiding theme will be signal models. It was parallel imaging that forced upon us a generalization of the signal model that amounted to introducing coil sensitivity as an encoding factor. And that sort of threw us out of the Fourier domain, or we needed to resort to somewhat more general reconstruction strategies. And in this signal model, it was soon enough turned out that relying on the coil sensitivity encoding work is really makes you really happy only if your case-space trajectory is also exactly right. It's not to the present day. It's not appreciated to the degree that I would like to see it appreciated, but trajectories are not nominal when you play them out, and it really helps to know exactly what they are. And there are a range of methods in the literature. You can use Jeff Dunn's method and measure trajectory from an off-center slice. You can use field probes, as we have done a lot in Zurich. You do prediction based on impulse response models, so you can feed with either phantom scans or field probe scans again. So as you're probably aware, our emphasis in this area has been on the field probes, small NMR experiments in suitably conditioned environments, magnetostatically and RF-wise and so forth, that you arrange around the anatomy that you want to image. For us, most of the time it's the head. Typically we put 16, and then we can fit the field evolution that the head is exposed to in terms of third-order harmonics, and phase expansion or field expansion. And that will then feed the signal model. And this is just to remind you that the difference can be significant. This is fairly demanding spiral imaging. It's at 7T. It's a pretty long readout, I think 50 milliseconds or so. And if you use the actual trajectory, not the nominal, you can reconstruct a really decent quality, high-resolution spiral single-shot image at 7T. I did not include any of the spiral images that we did 20 years ago on this occasion, but those looked horrible, and some of you may be able to relate. And with just the nominal, so the waveform that you demand from the system, you don't reconstruct anything nearly as good. It has been an important challenge to render this approach, let's say, day-to-day routine proof. And one of the things we've done is collaborate with Scope, actually a spin-off of our own lab, to do an integrated setup where the 16-channel receive coil is integrated with field probes. And in the meantime, this same route has been traveled by colleagues in University of Western Ontario. That's London, I guess. Not exactly sure. Kyle Gilbert and Corey Barron have done an excellent job of integrating field probes in a 7T head coil. So this is a little dark projecting, but anyway, with such a setup, we got into true routine use, and among others, we've been doing a lot of diffusion-weighted imaging. Again, single-shot spiral at rather high resolution. And I hope this proves that using spirals turns really robust once you don't worry about the trajectories anymore, or the background of resonance. I'll get back to that in a moment. With this setup and this spiral approach, Eugene in our group has been able to assess quantitatively how much SNR you gain by the ability to bring down echo time in diffusion imaging with the spiral approach. And actually just the echo time effect, okay, it mixes with several other contributions here, but the bulk is the echo time effect, increases SNR and diffusion scanning by 40 to 50% relative to EPI, be it partial Fourier or full Fourier. So it illustrates that expanding the signal model towards actual trajectories not only removes artifacts, but by doing so, it enables scanning that is more efficient in other ways as well. In this case, not just speed, but actually even SNR. So some of the really hard currencies, speed and sensitivity, are accessible if you do the work and expand your signal model. A second concern in an incomplete signal model is if you don't account for static off resonance or B0 non-inhomogeneity. That is sometimes of no great concern. It is typically of concern when your readouts are long, such as in the spiral scans that I showed you before. Here's a quick idea of how reconstruction algorithms look. Actually, the reconstructions that I showed before were obtained in rather a similar way, except that these MFI blocks here, multiple frequency interpolation blocks, were just FFTs. Now, with static off resonance in the signal model, you need to do a little more. Each of these FFTs or FTs turns into a multi-frequency interpolation. So you end up having to do quite a bit more FTs than you're used to. And this is also a really important message in the context of more general signal models. We came from Fourier transform as a signal model, and that, okay, was limited, or it was just what it was, but it was also gave you super efficient reconstruction, because Fourier transform is unitary and FFT is so efficient. So the more you generalize your signal model, the farther away you will be from the happy island where image reconstruction is so cheap. And then again, and I'll get back to that later, that means we'll need more computation, and computing power is one of the things that keep evolving in our favor, unlike some of the physics that we work with. Right, quick proof, accounting for static off-resonance helps. Here you see around the circumference quite a bit of blurring, consequence of ring-shaped off-resonance afflicted PSFs. And then including off-resonance, you get the nice image that we saw before that, and I didn't mention it then, was off-resonance corrected as well. And then we are finally at the point where spiral scanning with all its efficiency, SNR efficiency, and resolution efficiency can be robustly deployed for things such as, for instance, layer-specific fMRI. At 7T, spirals used to be known for being really hard at high field, really hard when the readouts are long, and always suspicious of blurring your data. Not the kind of thing that you could do layer-specific fMRI with if it was still so. And a final imperfection that you can account for if you introduce this into the signal model, higher order dynamic fields. So higher spatial order, that's what I mean here. We'll see an example of that in a moment. And this is the point where we started even doing entirely without Fourier transform. So this conjugate gradient reconstruction doesn't use Fourier transform anymore. Basically, this is a linear signal model. It defines an encoding matrix. All you do is stubbornly forward apply and adjoint apply this encoding matrix. And it's a lot of computation, but it turns out cheaper than doing pulling all the bells and whistles to somehow sneak back into Fourier territory. So a prominent example of higher order dynamic fields mattering is diffusion scanning again, where the massive diffusion gradients that are also long for a long time give you higher order eddy currents from eddy currents typically mostly in the cryostat. So with the field camera, you see these exponential settling curves for the different orders, second order, third order. This is the visualization of the first order. This is the 0th order. And of course, the sensitivity maps and B0 map also go into the model. And then, turns out, you reconstruct with diffusion weighting and without diffusion weighting identical images in a non-diffusing phantom. So this is non-diffusing. It's a very heavy oil. So that if you subtract the two, 0 is the result. But only if you use the third order dynamic field expansion. If you do less, if you stay with the first order, only the trajectory, then one of the images is distorted relative to the other. And not just distorted, also shows artifact. So again, a complication in the model and the reconstruction that bears putting up with. Now, this is an animation that we just found out doesn't quite work here. It doesn't really matter. This is an illustration in 10 different volunteers of field fluctuation in the head as people breathe. So there's actually dynamic at the breathing frequency, and some distortions are linear to quadratic. Others look rather 0th order to first order. So there's a variety. These fluctuations, they are caused by the diamagnetic susceptibility of the chest as it moves up and down. It basically is a dipole that creates a field up here. This has been known for a long time. Here, the field probes come in a slightly different role, or not entirely different. No, rather not different. They are still mounted in the lab frame and record field that can then be corrected for in real time. Because it fluctuates relatively slowly, and it is quite a bit more convenient to do the real-time correction than do this third-order reconstruction in the end of the day. And in this experiment, we also included motion detection. In this case, also with field probes. I'll get back to motion detection a little later. Point here is sensing capability can feed both reconstruction algorithms and control loops. And one of the things that I believe strongly is that sensing towards control will be an ever greater consideration for MR. Now, it's kind of sad that it's pretty dark here. It's just to show you that with this dual control approach for motion, this is excellent, thank you. For motion and for field fluctuation, you can boost image quality significantly. And to many of you, this is not news, but it's really important to consider because on this screen I see it better. These sorts of images I sometimes just gaze at for minutes on end, basically exploring what there is to see. And I realized that it must be incredibly hard. If you get a data set like this, whatever, 50 slices, and you're a radiologist, it's probably too tall an order to evaluate or to take in all this information. And that should have a lot to do with machine analysis, as we will see more in the future. But this too, please keep in mind, very rich data is available and perhaps overwhelming. Now, I want to continue briefly on the motion side. Clearly, motion artifacts have been a big topic in MR for basically ever, and motion detection methods have been worked on for a long time. Fortunately, quite a few are around. Oftentimes, they're based on optics, but there are also other mechanisms. I don't want to summarize them here. I want to point out one thing that we've been bothered with lately, and that is in efforts to decouple motion detection from the rest of what we're doing with the MR system, the sequence, and also not be limited by interference in other ways, such as arguably happens in optical tracking methods, where you need the famous line of sight. You need to see a marker that's mounted on the forehead, for instance, and then nothing else can be in the way. So in these efforts, we've been looking for a frequency window, an electromagnetic frequency window, in which none of this would be a concern. It has to be at high enough frequency not to be concerned about gradients that are around. It has to be at low enough frequency not to be concerned about NMR frequency. And of course, it must be a lot lower than any of the frequencies of magnetic field to which setups become intransparent just because of eddy currents. So, and further absorption for that matter. And it turns out there is a window of opportunity, so to speak, in the low megahertz range that is actually spare. Nothing in the MR experiment typically populates this area. So there you can operate fully independently and not bother about the others as well. And this is a route that Christoph Schildknecht in our lab has taken over the past few years. So he uses shortwave radio frequency, few megahertz, typically three different frequencies, let's say 2, 3, and 4 megahertz, sends them towards a marker. The marker is a resonance structure, resonant at these 3 different frequencies with its 3 different loops. So it reacts very strongly to this incident shortwave field and the currents on these inductors create a reflected field that can then be acquired, sensed with a receive array. And the signal received here, well, contains information about where the marker is and how it is oriented. And then you can go ahead and infer on the motion parameters. What is important here is this independence, or sort of staying out of this entire range, also means that the head and its tissues are transparent. So we can easily look through, for instance, the cheek and mount such a marker on the upper jaw, where you have a direct mechanical coupling to the skull, which is great because the brain, which we typically want to image, in these cases, also has a rather rigid body relationship with the skull. Okay, now you need to learn, and I hope this starts, you need to learn the relationship between the 6 motion parameters and the 24 readouts that you get, and that Christoph with a deep learning approach. It's the first time we've deployed deep learning in any way. It works really nicely. And then he gets very highly resolved motion tracking. So I don't want to make this into a motion tracking or motion correction talk. Just show you some traces. These are traces of the head, only a few seconds long, 5 seconds. And what you see is the cardioballistic effect. We've heard about it before today. These are sub-micron precision readouts. And Christoph proved this with a laser interferometer. So he's a very resourceful person. He printed it on a 3D printer, and it took him, I think, 10 days to build it. But with this laser interferometer, he assessed that actually this is understating still. His precision is in the order of 17 nanometers. So it's a very, very sensitive mechanism, and you can also tell by, this still tiny-looking motion being actually 50 times magnified. And it is the actual motion. It's not no artist's impression. It's the actual motion tracked here. And I want to point it out in today's context because I think it's remarkable how much information you can extract. This is just very rich data. It's anybody's guess what it's going to be good for. It can certainly be used for regression purposes in fMRI. It can be used to a certain degree for image reconstruction. Then again, plus minus 50 micrometer of motion are not so concerning for the image reconstruction. But we live in the age of artificial intelligence that is just hungry for data and turns it into seemingly whatever you like. And some of that will be useful, I think. There will be relationships with what's going on in the brain, for instance. Colleagues in Zurich are now looking a lot into brain-body interactions, where they study how the brain reacts to input from mechanoreceptors in the cardiovascular system, for instance. And just down the same alley, this is a whole different readout, again of cardiovascular action. This was done a longer time ago by Simon Gross in our lab. NMR probes again, measuring magnetic field above the chest as the heart does its work. So this is clearly magnetostatic or like quasi-stationary magnetic effects. But again, really rich data. If you think of the dynamic range here, the number of bits that are significant in these readouts. And of course, the next thing you might do is take deep learning and try to find the relationship between this and that. And that will have to do with fluid dynamics, with musculoskeletal aspects and so forth. All right. A real brief summary or recap of the signal model story. Signal models readily accommodate relevant physics, so they are open to that. If you can live without just FFT reconstruction, you can put anything in there that you know to be accurate, and it needs to be accurate. Like a sophisticated false signal model is not helpful. And to make the signal models accurate, among others, I believe you need all the sensing that you can do of the relevant quantities. And ideally, you do it stealth. Do it in the scanner, not disturbing anybody and not being disturbed. This incurs more computing and often substantially more computing for reconstruction. And you can do with somewhat less of that if you use it immediately, runtime, for correction and control. And that too, I think, sorry. Was that you? This too, I believe, will be with us, and you also see it in manufacturers, some of the manufacturers' propositions. Runtime intelligence will play a bigger role in the future, I think. And if you do all of this, you can increase image quality, but also the range of feasible scans, things that you would otherwise not have tried, especially for the high cases, high speed, high resolution, and high field, which of course we're headed for good reasons. That's rich data, huh? And rich data is what feeds AI. Now I need to make sure I don't go over the time. This is a bit of a rant almost, so I'll abridge it. As I said, Fourier transform is unitary, perfectly conditioned, the ideal numerical situation. General signal models are general. They are not ideal in any way. They have, inverting them has any kind of conditioning that you can imagine. And you face inverse problem economics. Any unknowns that you put into the model must be matched by equations. And equations here means measurements. So if you ask a lot, you need to measure a lot. And you need to measure judiciously. You need to sample the right degrees of freedom. In Fourier imaging, that was all simple. The sampling density and extent just determined the field of resolution. And conditioning was not a topic. This is really different now. Conditioning depends on how you sample, how much and how, both, and translates not so much into this statement like this scan is impossible or this scan is easy to do. It translates into something more gradual, noise propagation and noise structure in the image and convergence speed. Now, but ill conditioning is tempting to incur because in inverse problem economics, you can try to be stingy in order to be able to claim that your method is faster than another method. Just measure less and incur bad conditioning. And I think that's a kind of a treacherous route because, well, ill-conditioned problems are just bad, and solutions, straightforward solutions of ill-conditioned problems are bad. One thing that is typically done, of course, to address ill conditioning is regularization, and that is basically not adding information about whatever you have in the scanner, but it's adding information that you think you have anyway. You enforce prior knowledge or assumptions that you make, and there's coming from parallel imaging and before parallel imaging actually into the present. We have seen in, let's say, reconstruction considerations and computational work, we have seen a lot of regularization approaches. Limited support, e.g. in hyper, total variation, assuming that good images have little total variation. Compressed sensing, assuming, rightly, sometimes less rightly in other cases. You need to take it easy there, assuming that good images have low L0 and L1 norms in appropriate domains. And most recently, neural networks. Here, regularization enforces similarity to training data. Very flexible setup, obviously, because the networks are so flexible. And there is really strong hope that it will be possible to parameterize manifolds of plausible images in such a way that we can deploy that parameterization done by neural networks for regularization, but that's a little further out, I think. On this occasion, which is a bit special, I will take the liberty to utter a conviction of mine. Regularization is to be handled with care. It just constrains the solution. It does not retrieve additional information, so it does not leverage any of what happens during the scan. At its best, and there are many cases where it works like this, regularization reduces measurement to just what we need to know, and that's very economical. That's good inverse problem economics. At its worst, it doesn't stop there, but reduces measurement further and then yields false images based on false beliefs. And that is bad not only in daily life and politics, but also in MR. All right, now my last, really fast. So rather, in inverse problem economics, the alternative is measure more, encode more, and set up a better problem, encode to the max. And we've seen the two principal encoding mechanisms, gradient encoding and array encoding in the signal model. Of course, you boost array encoding, and we all do that by using many channels in smart geometry and do 3D encoding, 3D or multiband to leverage coil encoding in all dimensions. And on the gradient side, we try to make the best of available specs. Here's an example, real fast. You might have seen it before. This is work by Maria Engel from our lab. This is a 3D spiral readout in this stacked fashion along a tilted hexagonal grid that puts up with rather moderate gradient specs, but still ends up doing 5 frames per second, so whole volume acquisition in 200 milliseconds at reasonable, or at this resolution, 3 millimeters resolution. And I would argue the strength, the reason why this is so fast is, well, we sample exactly hexagonally, which is good in terms of conditioning economics, and we make sure that we never slow down, really. This is what spirals really do well. They don't slow down. Gradient magnitude is k-space speed. So if you want to rake in a lot of k-space information, keep the gradient magnitude up for fast encoding. And I sort of resorted to an information theory textbook here. The channel capacity, the maximum bit rate that an RF channel can transmit, according to Shannon and Hartley, is proportional to bandwidth. It is just proportional to bandwidth. Not strictly, because SNR will also depend on bandwidth, but to a lesser degree. So this basically says, regardless of how you encode, even regardless of how you build your system and whether you use gradients or not, if your information comes through an RF channel, the bandwidth must go up. And the only way of doing that is to use the gradient at its maximum magnitude to spread the signal out across the bandwidth. All right, and then, okay, this works. It's rather interesting in that it gives you more direct access to actual hemodynamic response functions in different parts of the brain. It nicely resolves spectrally the physiological confounds that we often are concerned with in fMRI, respiration and heartbeat and their interactions. And finally, and this is really, I think, the second last slide, that was about using gradients economically to encode to the max within gradient limitations, gradient specs. And of course, the elephant in the room is the gradient system itself. If the gradients can do more, we can do more. And that is doing more of the best sort. Gradient encoding is super efficient and effective. So quite a few labs and manufacturers have looked into higher performing gradients lately. With the help of colleagues at Philips and a smaller company in the Netherlands, Futura, we also set out on such an adventure some years ago, we chose a rather narrow effective bore for a head and extremity gradient and came out at these specs, 200, 1200. And we were really keen to have a truly 100% duty cycle. And it bears emphasis that working with this beast is no point if you don't have field sensing, because the eddy current situation is more complicated than you're used to. Everything is very fast, and you rely on very accurate trajectory information again, and higher order field. So all that I discussed in the first half of the talk goes into working with a gradient like this. And of course, we're also aware of the impulse and Magnus gradient projects lately. They do wider bores, so they have a much harder time reaching similar specs. And still, they get up to 200, 900, 200, 500. And as best as I understand that with finite duty cycle, which is not to be criticized, this inner diameter is 33 centimeters, I think. For these, it's rather to the tune of 40. And the energy content of a gradient field goes with a fifth power of diameter. So anybody can be forgiven if the duty cycle is finite with so much more energy in the field. For us, this brings down the echo time in diffusion spiral imaging to 90 milliseconds, which is a lot less than usually, boosts SNR further. So these are single-shot acquisitions. Okay, this is mean diffusion weighted. And it can give you crazy things like single-shot time series. So excite once, do 30 spiral readouts in a row, each taking 2.5 milliseconds. And then after 77 milliseconds, you have 30 frames of image at 3.4 millimeters, not so bad. Quite interesting for things like looking at what the actual T2 star decay is that we always claim is exponential and isn't really. And that you can do on a pixel by pixel basis. And this is my closing slide. I try to make it quick. It's almost like a legacy slide that I try to make. We come from physics. There's a domain in which the physics happens, where the hardware works, where the hardware is designed to implement physics. And in this way, we produce data that ends up in the domain of computing and data. They are not separate, obviously. They are actually connected by the signal models that I discussed so much. Signal models harness encoding power. They free you up in deploying whatever encoding power you have. And they deploy computing power that grows in our favor all the time. So signal models are really key in connecting these two domains. Signal models accommodate imperfections, which is good, takes out errors, and they facilitate high performance regimes, high field, high speed, high resolution. Sensing plays a key role. I think I've belabored that enough already. Again, I think it connects the two worlds very naturally. It deploys physics. All the sensing is physics-based, and it generates data for computing to make sense of. And it feeds signal models and the control approaches. Now, the elephant in this happy room is machine learning, looming large over almost everything now. And a question that many people ask now is, what does it mean? Does it mean that we all like switch off the light on the left and move to the right and do artificial intelligence all the time? Because the physics is done and it's known. Or is it going to be different? And my take is, it is clear, I think, that machine learning will leverage more information than humans. It will do that faster and cheaper eventually, and that is very attractive. And it will be more information than humans can take in today. The neural network that is the observer's brain is not optimized in terms of data throughput and memory and so forth. So I think machine learning will leverage added information better than we can today, but it cannot generate information. Machine learning can find inferences and statistics and see, pick up data from everywhere, but it cannot generate information about anything that we have in the scanner right now. The only way we can do that is by physics. The interaction with the individual patient is purely physical. There's no, right now, there's no temporal plug for the brain. Only physics can deliver more information for machine learning to leverage. So my slightly hopeful pitch is, I think we should continue to do physics and go really hard doing it to make data richer. And we've seen data that was too rich to even look at. And then machine learning will put richer data to work. And eventually, perhaps, some of the human observers out of work. But I'm not particularly passionate about this prospect. I'm passionate about really good reasons to further improve how much information is encoded in MR data. Sorry for running over time significantly. I apologize. I still wish you a proper lunch.